of the Mizrahi Aliyah of the 50s, but much, much worse, for one simple reason. The skins are black. I'm going to say that again over and over again, because one of, for me, the most important impact that this Aliyah, and we'll come to it through, and we've got a couple of people here who've had close contact with this group, like Howard, for example, and I spent time in Israel, and he knows this probably as well, if not better than I do, because he knows it from close up. Racism and discrimination has always been a bubbling under the surface in Israel. Initially, you had the Mizrahi, you had Yaldei Taiman, you had the children of Yemen that we saw last week, which is still bubbling up and becoming huge. And we'll see next week, we've got a personal story we're going to talk about. We're going to do it next week. But in this Aliyah, you walk down the street with your black skin and has the same repercussions and the same I'm getting tongue-tied here, never mind. Has the same implications and the same problems of discrimination, racism, whether it be South Africa, the South of America, the South of America, like Texas and Kentucky and these places, where the Black Lives Matter movement had its impact in those societies. The Ethiopian Aliyah has had to have a similar impact on Israeli society, and you'll see why. There are three real modes of how this Aliyah took place and when and where. I'm going to go through the history of it very quickly, because the history of where it was, Abyssinia and those places are not really important. The important part is from the 1980s onwards, but let's go through it bit by bit. So here is a table of the number of Olim from Ethiopia compared to the total in the general number of immigrants, Olim, to Israel in those time periods. So you can see, number-wise, it's almost irrelevant. I mean, 1961 to 1971 is a good example. 98, where almost 500,000, and Joan will correct me if my numbers go a bit skew here, but that looks like 500,000 close to me, right? 427,000, whatever, 3 down. You can see that these numbers really don't make very much, except when you start getting to 1980 onwards. Okay, 17,000, 40,000, 15,000, 13,000. These are significant numbers. And it doesn't have to be relative to the numbers coming elsewhere. 40,000 people is a lot of people. And we'll see how these Aliyot worked, because they worked in operation-wise. It wasn't just people like going on Aliyah from America or from Britain or from South Africa in groups of 40, 50 people at a time. This was saving the population, literally. So prior to 1977, as you know, it was known as Abyssinia, was under Italian colonial rule. Haile Selassie was the most influential person we knew of. Jews were permitted to make Aliyah. And then in 1975, you had this Marxist dictator, Mengistu, his name was, and he then clamped down on Aliyah and became very anti-Semitic in a sense of the Falasha Jews, the, I don't want to get to the name of the Beta Israel, as they called themselves, right? Because we're going to have to come to that when Israel starts to recognize them as a Jewish community. Now, in 1975, this guy comes to power. And then the question rises, who is a Jew? Is this community really Jewish? Halachically, it's not. So either you change the rules, or you find another way of defining who is a Jew. Now, what happened back in the day, I'm just trying to get my head back in place. The rabbis, the chief rabbis in Israel, both Ashkenazi and Sephardi in this time, did a huge study, and they decided that this community was the descendants of the Israelites. Not Israelis, the Israelites of way back Tanakh time. So as descendants of the Israelites, it was okay for them to be defined as Jewish. Now I'm going to go into a map and a thing and just put two things together. This was the Aliyah route to Israel. This is how these people had to get to Israel in some way. I'll talk about the way in a minute. Now, there were two routes. One was to walk, literally walk, through the Sudan, and then Israel would pick them up and they'd get across. Some of them even crossed the Red Sea there and then walked through the desert and through the Negev. But the most important way, obviously, was through Addis Ababa, and Israel was flying planes through, and they did these special operations called, and I'll come to them in a minute. This was what the plane looked like. Remember, we spoke about the record of a Boeing 747, people in it is 1,120 or something close to that, because they shoved that amount of Ethiopians into the plane when they were flying them out in Operation Moses. Now, the first big operation to get the Jewish community out was in between, well, this wasn't just 1 year, but between 1984 and 1990, the Mossad, the Jewish agency, the government, and people like me, funnily enough, were involved in this. How was I involved? Without even knowing. In 1984, I was on Shlichut, our family was on Shlichut, in South Africa, in Habonim. I was the main shaliach of Habonim between 1983 and 1985, based in Johannesburg. One day I'm sitting in my office, and a guy walks in, and I can see straight away, he's a Magad, he's a Mefaked of a Gedud, he's a Sgan Aluf, he's a lieutenant colonel, not in uniform, but you know these guys, right? Got a big gold medallion. Anyway, no matter. He walks in, and he says to me, he speaks to me in Hebrew, and he says, you know, you guys shlichim are a waste of money and a waste of time. And I said, yeah, really? First of all, who are you and why are you here? Anyway, he said, right, on Sunday, you and the other shlichim are going to come to Pretoria, bring the pistols that you got. We had guns. We had a pistol they gave us. We didn't, whatever. No, I didn't, doesn't matter. Bring your gun with you to Pretoria. I said, you're going to be kidding me. I don't even know. Don't argue with me. Just do it. I mean, he was like a nasty guy. You could see he didn't hold back. Anyway, we go to Pretoria. And this, by the way, I shouldn't be recording this, but it doesn't matter. This is too long ago for anyone to care. We go to Pretoria, and he explains to us why we're there. Why are we there? Because Operation Moses is going to be flying out thousands of Ethiopians in the next few months, and plan B, if anything should go wrong, is to bring them through South Africa and land the planes in Johannesburg, and we would have to be like a security detail of Gondwana. So you have to be prepared. They took us to a rifle range. We had to shoot our pistols. I don't think I hit the target, but it doesn't matter. So unbeknown to us, we had no idea that this was going on. And what happened was it turned into a rescue mission, right? Now, some of you might have seen the movie that they made, horrendous, also one of these docudramas, right? Of the hotel diving school that the Mossad set up and used as a cover for them to get out on boats. It's just nod your heads if you've seen the movie. It's on Netflix. I forget what it's called. I'll put it in an email. It's worth watching. There's also beggars belief. What they did was they set up a diving school, a hotel sort of diving school in the middle of nowhere, literally in the desert. It was an old Italian resort place that had been abandoned. They redid the building stuff. It became so successful. It ran for 10 years and they made a huge amount of money, right? Nobody knew it was the Israeli Mossad running this place in order to get these Ethiopian Jews out. And what happened was, over that period, they got out 8,000 people through that route. Now, the next operation was Operation Shlomo, Operation Solomon in the 1990s. Nobody knew the exact number of what this Beta Israel community was large, because they lived in lots of villages. It wasn't just one area. Well, it was one area, but lots of villages within that area. It wasn't just one place. So what they tried to do was to get them as close to Addis Ababa as possible. And what they did was they managed to get about 150,000 people within that area. In May 1991, 14,000 people they got out, and the rescue took place within 34 hours. This is what's remarkable and, in fact, quite unbelievable about this whole thing. Okay? Now, I'm going quite quickly here because there's a whole discussion that's going to come in a minute. The next one was Operation Dove's Wings, which was in the last 10 years, the last decade, right? The law of return was tweaked to include Zera Israel, the seed of Israel, which was the descendants of the Israelites, so that this community could be seen as taking advantage, not seen that, could take advantage of the law of return. They were Jews. So this whole debate of who is a Jew, why I mentioned it then was because it's not an undiscussable, for want of a better word, topic that we've always stayed away from. And soon we're going to have to discuss it as far as the American reform and conservative communities are concerned, and marriage and conversion. I don't want to go into it now. So the who is a Jew is really, really definable, in my opinion, or discussable. So these guys and women and children and members of the community are blood descendants of the Israelites, but halachically, who cares? Now, at the moment in Ethiopia, we know there's a civil war going on, and there's still thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of this community that are stranded there. I don't know what's going on, but I'm sure something's going on. In 2 or 3 years' time, you'll read that thousands of Ethiopians were got out of Ethiopia during the Civil War. How and where and what, God alone knows. And this is all happening, by the way, while Israel's dealing with everything else that's going on. Okay? So during the COVID and the Civil War, I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. 95 people arrived in 2015. November 2015, Israel managed to bring out, or is trying to bring out, up to 9,000 by 2020. Nobody knows exactly how many they got out. But in 2016, I think it was 140. I'm not exactly sure of the exact number. Doesn't matter. They say 63, but it was greater. It was greater, 63. And we unite with the family. Now remember, what happened in the waves of Operation Shlomo and Operation Moshe and Operation Dove's Wings were, some of the families were left behind because they didn't manage to get to where they had to get to. And brothers and sisters were separated. Mothers and children were separated. Very, very, very sad stories have come out from that. okay? But they're now trying to reunite all those families who are left behind. But now comes the issue that I mentioned at the beginning. Racist discrimination. Now, we're going to be very careful here, because the examples I'm going to give you are extreme examples to shock you on purpose, because most of you don't know anything about these issues. But these are extreme issues. I'm going to talk about them in quite detail, because they are really, really important. The first big issue was in 1996, blood donations from the Falachic, the Ethiopian community in Israel, were thrown away because the Magen David Adom said they were contaminated with HIV. Black people were probable carriers of HIV, and no blood from this community was allowed to be used in transfusions. And that came out again through one of the journalists who was doing an investigation on HIV. And of course, you can imagine what that did to the society. A few years later, the mayor of Or Yehuda, it's a little town, refused to accept a group of Ethiopians because he said it would lower the value of the property within the town. Nobody wanted to live, this is what he was saying, right, where there's black people live. Four years later, in Petach Tikva, no less, an important town in Israel, Ethiopian young girls, 9 or 10, 11 years old, were denied admission to 3 semi-private Haredi schools. Now, what happened here was, this was during Netanyahu's time, he and other politicians went berserk and let rip at the Haredi community for this. They had to reverse the decision. And for the first time that there was a real stand against this. Up until now, there'd been, rumblings and now, it's discrimination, it's not right. But this time, and credit to Netanyahu, because he stood up and he went berserk. I remember it very, very, very clearly. So, didn't end. In 2012, a TV program uncovered a scandal where they found that Ethiopian women were given a birth control pill called Depo-Provera without being told what it was about and what the side effects were, and so on and so on and so on. It was literally given to them under false pretenses. Once again, because there was an environment. Now, this isn't government policy, by the way. This isn't institutionalized racism. This isn't institutionalized activity. This is someone doing something somewhere, right? Because they didn't want to have a large black community in their town. Three years later, 2015, an Ethiopian IDF soldier in a fighting unit was attacked by Israeli policemen and beaten up badly. What the policemen didn't know was there were cameras that filmed the whole incident. And he used the excuse that the guy was going, was going to attack him and was self-defense. And you can see from the film strip, from the camera strip, from the Sirton, the guy takes his bicycle, the soldier, the Ethiopian guy takes his bicycle, puts it on the side, and this policeman grabs him by the neck and beats him up for absolutely no reason other than he was Ethiopian. Now, there had been protests on and off by the community. The one huge protest took place 2 years ago now, 2019, before COVID, when an off-duty policeman shot and killed a young Ethiopian in Haifa. The policeman was off duty with his family. He had his wife and I think 2 kids, one or 2 kids. And these Ethiopian kids had started with him, and doesn't matter what it was. It was some guy, you're a policeman, you don't like black kids. He said they were throwing stones, he was protecting his family, and he shot and killed this Ethiopian youngster. The Ethiopian community then went out for the first time in big numbers and protested at very important junctions and brought the whole country to a standstill. This was as bad as it was driving around Israel as it was. And they then realized that protest, what it can do and what it can't do, and woke up the government. Now, those are extreme examples. There are other examples where individuals from the Ethiopian community have done remarkable stuff. I don't want to go into the names because I'm sure Howard will have a story or two, and you're going to do it in short way, not too long. But the important thing for me in terms of the impact of what it's done to Israeli society is the following: racial profiling and police brutality. Now, those, I could have put that into any society, whether it be the USA, whether it be South Africa, whether it be London, and stopping black youngsters because they might be carrying guns or carrying knives or part of